Without a question, the modern day Straw Hats are one of the strongest pirate crews in all of One Piece, with a captain capable of battling Yonkos, a first mate standing as one of the strongest swordsmen in the world, a former warlord at the helm, and a genetically modified chef coming in kicking. There are few weaknesses to be found amongst the crew, and that's without mentioning the presence of the world's greatest navigator, doctor, shipwright, liar, musician, and the only person who is capable of reading the poneglyph all on one ship. When it comes to how balanced a crew is, there is no other team that quite matches up to the Straw Hats, with each of the individual members boosting the strength and covering the weaknesses of the team. Their bond has been forged through years of strife and conflict as it's transformed into a relationship unlike any other. Now this begs the question, what kind of impact would have been felt amongst the Straw Hats if one of the integral components of this crew were to disappear? The domino effect at hand would be exceptional, as throughout the course of the series, every single crew member has had their respective moments in the spotlight, whether if this was saving the crew through their specific skill or via solving a problem through their unique knowledge. The absence of any one member would at some point undoubtedly condemn all of the others. In this video, I'm proposing what would happen if we remove one element which links each of the members of the Straw Hat crew together, which would result in a scattered group of people located across the seas who no longer have anything to do with each other. In this video, I'm going to theorize what if Luffy had never met any of the Straw Hats. If such a situation were to arise where our favorite Captain Luffy never had his aspirations for becoming the Pirate King, and if he had never set sail from Dawn Island, what kind of an impact would this have caused across the sea? I want to look at how each of the lives of the Straw Hats would have been changed with the absence of Luffy, and I'm going to start with the very first addition to the crew, Zoro. The fate of Zoro is probably the simplest of all of the crew members to predict, because Zoro had started the series starved and near death while tied to a post in Shellstown. Prior to the start of the series, Zoro had killed the pet wolf of Helmeppo before he could harm a young girl in the town. Since Helmeppo was the son of Marine Captain Axehand Morgan, he had threatened to damage Zoro's reputation with the Marines if he did not follow his demands. Now at the time, because Zoro's career as a pirate hunter had relied on him working with the Marines, he had agreed to Morgan's terms. Helmeppo's demand was for Zoro to be tied to a post in the center of the Marine base for a full month in order to gain amnesty. However, Helmeppo never had any intention of following through on the deal, as he revealed to Luffy after Zoro's 9th day being tied up that he had intended to have Zoro executed within 3 days' time. What followed was a great escape where Luffy had retrieved Zoro's swords from the Marine base, and the two had fought and defeated everyone within the base, including Helmeppo and Morgan, before they had a chance to execute Zoro. Now, if we remove Luffy from this occasion, then Zoro would have never learnt about Helmeppo's treachery, and by the time that Zoro would have learnt that his death was imminent, it would have been already too late for him to do anything about it, because he was restrained and he didn't have his swords, so he would have had little to no chance of survival. We are already one Straw Hat down while discussing what would have been their fate without Luffy in their life. Luffy's next recruit was Nami, who he had found in Orange Town while she was running away from Buggy the Pirate's henchman. This was after she had stolen a map of the Grand Line from them. While Nami cleverly used Luffy as a means to dispose of her pursuers, there is little doubt that she would have been able to evade them without Luffy's presence. But with this in mind, it wouldn't have been very difficult for Nami to escape in general. This would have resulted in her not interacting with Buggy at all. The key issue for Nami is her relationship with her long-term captor and the main antagonist of her backstory, Arlong. In the entirety of the East Blue, there is unlikely to be anyone stronger than Arlong. Now, combined with his bribing of the Navy officials to cover up any information about his seizure of the Konomi Islands, it effectively makes Arlong untouchable. Now, while the combined might of Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp was sufficient to beat his crew, there will be no such saving within this scenario in a world where Luffy had never met Nami. Nami would continue to work for Arlong as part of his crew, drawing maps for him and stealing treasure in the meantime in an attempt to buy back the lives of her village. This goal is unfortunately one which he will never reach, as we had seen within the series, because Arlong was well aware of her money collecting plot and was more than willing to steal her entire stash, which would effectively mean that the last 10 years of her life serving under Arlong have all gone to waste. Nami would either continue working for Arlong's crew indefinitely, maintaining her village's safety, or she would possibly be captured or even killed during one of her ventures in robbing the pirate crews across the East Blue. Her only minuscule hope of freeing her village would either be through a sympathetic marine becoming aware of what is going on her island and making someone strong enough to defeat Arlong aware of it, or through a former member of the Sun Pirates like Jinbe learning of what Arlong has done and coming to stop him. Though because Arlong had gone over a decade unimpeded, it is unlikely that either of these scenarios would happen anytime soon. Usopp's first encounter with the Straw Hats came as they had arrived on his home island, where he had attempted to scare the crew off by claiming that he had an entire army under his command. Naturally, the Straw Hats were unimpressed by his obvious lie, but despite this, they had very quickly become friends with Usopp. Through their interactions, the group had uncovered Captain Kuro's great plot to inherit the family wealth of Kaya, and thanks to their timely intervention, they had ended up saving the island. This was no easy matter, however, as it had taken Luffy's strength to ultimately defeat Kuro, who otherwise could have been considered untouchable by the standards of East Blue. It is highly likely that without the presence of the Straw Hats, Kuro would have found no need to actually kill Usopp. It was only because of Luffy being there that Usopp had ended up in the situation which had resulted in him punching Kuro in the face and overhearing his plan to kill Kaya when he was discussing it with Django. Without that and the group's efforts in stopping Kuro's crew from attacking the island, Kuro would have easily succeeded in killing Kaya and inheriting her wealth. Following this, he would have killed the former members of his crew as he had planned to do so originally in order to remove any knowledge of his past as a pirate. Usopp would live out the rest of his life on his home island, forever lacking the courage to venture out on his own without Luffy inspiring him. Sanji, much like Zoro, would have found himself in a bad situation even if Luffy had never set foot on the Baratie. The oncoming assault of what had remained of Don Creek's fleet was something which the crew of the Baratie was unprepared to face, and without the addition of Luffy and Zoro, they would have had no hope of fending off their attackers. The only hope that Sanji and the Baratie have for a favorable outcome would be if they can hold out long enough for Mihawk to arrive and finish off the remnants of Don Creek's fleet, which, given that he had arrived only about 10 minutes after the fight had actually started, may not be as unlikely as it seems. If Sanji and the crew of the Baratie are to survive their encounter with Don Creek, then Sanji would continue to work as a chef on the Baratie, although I could see him setting out to sea one day in the future, given the encouragement and enthusiasm that he had received from the crew when he had set off with the Straw Hats, and the fact that it is his lifelong dream to find the All Blue. Depending on Sanji's fate following his setting out to sea, this may actually prove to be one of the more hopeful outcomes out of all of the Straw Hats, though the threat that his family could one day come after him would always remain as a threat that would be looming over him in the future. The first crewmate that the Straw Hats had found within the Grand Line came on Drum Island, where Luffy had climbed to the island's castle in order to find someone to help Nami and Sanji, who had both fallen ill. It was there that they had met with Chopper, who had been living in the castle with Dr. Kureha since the castle was abandoned by King Wapol following an attack by Blackbeard. Wapol's return and warning that he intends to reclaim the castle had caused Chopper to confront him, which with the addition of the Straw Hats he was successful in doing. Without them, Chopper had little hope in beating Wapol and his subordinates, with the latter being shown capable of heavily injuring Chopper even when he had the Straw Hats' assistance. The only slim hope that Chopper would have had of surviving this encounter would be to use his monster point form, something which at this point caused him to lose all rationality in exchange for a great amount of strength. Assuming that he would be able to defeat Wapol from this, then he and Korea would continue to live in the castle while providing medical services to those on the island. If Chopper still isn't capable of winning the fight even with his monster point form, then his story would sadly end right here. Robin's status amongst the Straw Hats is quite unusual, as she had began the relationship with the crew not as an ally but as an antagonist. Her introduction came as the mysterious Miss Sunday, the second in command of Crocodile's organization Baroque Works. Her time following the destruction of Ohara was spent on the run from the world government, something which she had been successful in through assimilating into pirate crews before abandoning them when the world government had finally caught up to her. This eventually led to her hiding alongside Crocodile, whose status as a warlord had helped to hide her from the world government sights. As part of this arrangement though, she would assist him in his plan to conquer Alabasta, which in reality was simply a stepping stone towards his true goal of locating the ancient weapon Pluton. Whether or not Robin would betray Crocodile once more by lying about the contents of the poneglyph is unknown. Was it Luffy's presence which had inspired her to do so? Or was she simply unwilling to present a man like Crocodile with that kind of power? If she does betray him, then she will die in the Alabasta catacombs, so she would be no longer able to serve any purpose to Crocodile. If she tells the truth, then it is possible that she would would live on and continue to assist Crocodile in his search for the ancient weapon. If at some point following this Robin does somehow escape from Crocodile's grasp, then she would find herself in the same situation that she had faced for the last 20 years, being on the run from the world government. Outside of aligning with a Yonko crew, there would be little hope for Robin to ever live a happy life. She would remain on the run, always looking over her shoulder, until there comes a time where she can no longer outrun her pursuers. As an interesting knock-on effect of this entire situation, Crocodile would no longer lose his title of Warlord through his defeat from Luffy. This would go on to hinder Blackbeard's initial plan of joining the Warlords, as there would be no longer an open seat on the table for him to take. Likewise, without Crocodile's scheme being uncovered, there would be a lack of support of the dissolution of the Warlord system, which passed at the Reverie just 2 years later. Franky, much like Robin, is one of the few Straw Hats who initially began as an antagonist. The Franky family were responsible for the assault on Usopp in Water 7 and for stealing the entirety of the Straw Hats' treasure, something that they frequently did to arriving pirate crews thanks to their position as the most prominent crime family within the city. As the story progresses from the climax of Water 7 going into Enies Lobby, Franky would end up becoming an ally and then eventual crewmate, and none of this would have happened without Luffy's intervention. It was only through the Straw Hats' presence and the kidnapping of Nico Robin that Franky ended up being saved from the clutches of CP9, who at this point were the strongest force within the entirety of Water 7. Much like in the actual series, Franky would be unable to contend against Rob Lucci, and he would be forced to hand over the blueprints to Pluton, assuming that he doesn't destroy them beforehand. However, without Luffy's help, Franky's fate following this won't be as optimistic. As someone with direct and in-depth knowledge of one of the ancient weapons, Franky would be deemed too dangerous to leave alone. He would likely end up spending the rest of his life locked away in Impel Down in order to prevent him from passing his information on to anyone else, assuming that he is left alive at all. A tragic end to the tale of one of the greatest shipwrights of all time. Brook's first encounter with Luffy and the Straw Hats came during Thriller Bark, and within the span of one conversation, the musical skeleton had agreed to become part of the crew. Naturally, and as is the case with everything for the Straw Hats, things didn't turn out to be quite that easy. As to actually leave the Florian Triangle alive, Brook would have first had to retrieve his shadow, which had been stolen by the warlord Gecko Moria. The story that unfolds is what I believe to be one of the most underrated arcs in all of One Piece. We see the corpse of the colossal Oz, the spirit of the ancient samurai god Ryuma, and the appearance of Bartholomew Kuma, who leads to Zoro's legendary Nothing Happens scene. And yet, without Luffy, none of these events would have transpired. There is rather, unfortunately, little change to Brook's fate without the timely appearance of the Straw Hats. Brook was quite tragically sailing aimlessly within the Florian Triangle for many years before Luffy and company had encountered him, as he was surrounded by nothing but the memory of his now deceased crewmates. This is something that would likely have continued on indefinitely until he ends up stumbling across Thriller Bark, where he would unsuccessfully attempt to retrieve his shadow before finally reuniting with his crew in the afterlife once and for all. And finally, we have the latest and possibly even last official member of the Straw Hat Pirates, the Knight of the Sea, Jinbe. Jinbe's addition to the crew came far after his introduction to the story, with 7 arcs passing between our first time seeing him on screen and his abscondment from the Big Mom Pirates in order to join the Straw Hats. But to know how Jinbe would fare in the absence of Luffy, we first need to go back to how their relationship had begun. Jinbe's first encounter with Luffy came in the depths of Impel Down, where the fishman was imprisoned because of his refusal to fight against Whitebeard during the upcoming execution of Podcastee Ace. And without Luffy, that is likely where he would remain, because it is no exaggeration to say that Luffy single-handedly started the chain of events which led to the mass breakout at Impel Down. And while it may have been possible for the world government to release Jinbe following the war, this isn't something that we can say for certain. Jinbe had already shown his willingness to disobey the orders of the Marines via his refusal to fight at Marineford, and as we were shown with Doflamingo's attempt to murder Gecko Moria, the world government are more than willing to eliminate warlords who they deem to be no longer beneficial to them. This leaves Jinbe's fate to either be a tragic end, spending the rest of his life locked in the deepest part of Impel Down, or serving under the Big Mom Pirates in order to receive her continued protection of Fishman Island, as he did for a period of time in the actual series, though obviously in this case there would be no Straw Hat crew to inspire him to leave further down the line. Also, since we're covering Impel Down, it is always an interesting point to mention that without Luffy's interference resulting in the release of Shiryu of the Rain, it is entirely possible that Blackbeard and his entire crew could have met their ends in the underwater out of prison, dying a slow, painful death at the hands of Magellan's poison hydra. Although equally, without Luffy being in the process of breaking everyone out of Impel Down, Magellan may have been far less trigger happy in wiping out the entire crew of a warlord before the biggest war that the world government has ever faced in centuries. I really hope that this video has given you an appreciation of just how important Luffy has been to the world of One Piece, where his presence alone has already saved the lives of so many people. This video was limited to discussing what would have happened to the Straw Hats if Luffy had never met any of them, but the number of lives that Luffy has impacted within the series extends far beyond them. If you would like me to explore how the lives of other characters would have changed if Luffy had never set sail into the big wide world, then leave a like on this video and let me know in the comments. It goes without saying that characters like Law, Buggy, Kid and Sabo would only be the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Luffy's absence within the story. So if you want more what if videos like this, then definitely subscribe and stick around to the channel so that you remain up to date with all of my latest One Piece videos covering chapter reviews, theories, character analysis and much more. Lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next One Piece video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.